This is episode number 3 of the Outdoor Report podcast, and we're in a little different situation than we have been with the other podcasts and what we normally do. We are in my shed right now, and we've got some bloody hands. We've got I looked over to my right, there's a carcass hanging that we're cutting up on, and there's 2 bucks with antlers on the ground. So it's been quite a couple days. So actually standing across from me with his blade out and cutting into meat is my neighbor, Joe Hemmerich. And Joe, why don't you explain the current scene that's going on?
Well, sitting in Wes's garage, like he said, we're actually hanging out with his son Carter, and we're cutting up the 2 deer that him and I harvested last night at 6:14 p.m. and 6:15 p.m. Kind of a crazy story. Him and I were out.
Well, I'm going to stop you right there. Before we get into that, so we'll get into the whole story of what's going on, I guess, what we're cutting on. So Joe is, you might get used to Joe. Joe, along with his best friend Jake, will probably be on this podcast from time to time and either be co-hosts or maybe they'll take control of the thing and be hosts, who knows. But so I moved to Malacca 5 years ago, and at that time I was still into archery hunting primarily. So I got permission on a spot. I didn't know anybody here, so I had to start from scratch and do door knocking and looking at plat books and doing research. And I found a property that looked good, and I got permission on it. And when I scouted that property, I came across a food plot right across the property line. And I thought to myself, wow, check this out. This is ideal. As I scouted the property more, I came to find out that all the deer are running out of this woods and across the property that I have permission off, and I can cut the deer going to the food block, and I can cut them off, but I'd be cutting off whoever just put all this hard work and time into a food plot. So I had some ethics there and a moral dilemma that kicked in. And my first thought was, I'm just going to hunt it, and I got permission. But then I thought to myself, that's probably not a good idea, and I should probably go get, talk to whoever that hunter is and try to get on the same page so at least we're not goofing each other up. So I went to the neighboring property and knocked on the door, and was about, kind of had to prep myself to give a good sales pitch to whoever it was to at least come across friendly. So that was Joe's mom at the time. And I'll let you fill in from there. So I went over and asked, or just wanted to find out who was hunting, so at least we could talk and at least kind of be on the same page. And Joe found out that somebody asked about it. And what was your initial reaction?
Well, my first reaction was basically the same thing as every one of my other reactions. It's some guy from the suburbs, north of Minneapolis, looking for another spot to go bring him and 20 of his buddies and shoot everything that runs by and hoot and holler and screw up everything I have going at my house. Because I just started actually doing food plots, putting in a lot of work, scouting, trail cameras. So I'm just starting to get to the point where it's paying dividends. And so my mom calls me and she goes, "Oh, it's this."
Before you
go ahead, Wes.
How long have you? So this spot, how long have you put time and effort on the food plots and actually hunting it?
Well, I actually got seriously into bow hunting in 2013 when I bought my first bow. First season, I didn't do any work; just went out and hunted the way it was. And after the first year, I did shoot a doe. But it wasn't on that property. It was actually at a buddy's property. But I just wasn't having a ton of deer. because I just wasn't putting myself in the right situations at the right times. I started doing some research a little bit, and my good friend Jake Masho and I started really getting into it when he borrowed his brother's bow, and we both started getting serious about it and starting doing some research, looking what to do, food plots, okay, what kind, this, that, and I really got into that probably the season of 2014. So this would be my 4th season of bow hunting, and so I was just starting to. It'd be my 2nd year with food plots, or 3rd year with food plots, when I got this phone call from Wes, and I had tons of pictures. I had, I don't know, 3 or 4 bucks over that 120, 130, which were at the time to me giants, of course. And so I get this phone call from Wes, or a phone call from my mom about Wes, and I go, great, give me his number, I'm calling him. So I call him, and I was pretty barky, pretty quick to question, didn't let him talk much, but he kind of finally...
I never sensed it, just so you know.
You didn't?
I didn't sense any hostility. I knew that you were very directive.
But it turns out he was a halfway decent guy. Yeah, what are you doing here? What are your intentions with my neighboring property? No. But we finally started talking. I said, yeah, it is what it is. Do what you got to do. And we kind of met in the middle, and I think he decided to hunt. He kind of gave me first pick. He would say, hey, I'm thinking about hunting Friday. Are you?
Right.
And I'd say, nope, not planning on it. Go ahead. And at this point, I was kind of giving him a chance, but I don't know. He just turned out to be everything he said. He backed up, and I really appreciated that. And it's hard to get somebody's word nowadays without anything in writing. So we eventually kind of started talking, and he eventually, correct me if I'm wrong, but we really connected when you shot that nice one, correct?
Yeah.
I think that's where we kind of connected, and I went and...
We the day that you talked to me on the phone, I was back there, and there was a ground blind or something that I found. So I found a ground. I found a ground blind back on the property, and then Joe already talked to me before this, but then I found the ground blind, and I texted him. I said, "Is this your ground blind?" He said, "Sure it is." And then he came over, and we chatted a little bit more, and then come to find out we actually are like, all right, we got kind of similar interests. This is kind of cool. All right, well, so then. Back in, is that 2 years ago?
That was 2 years ago.
So 2 years ago, it was November 2nd. So I saw this buck. I was able to put a move on it. Short, we'll make a long story short, but I put a move on it, rattled it, got to the stand that's in the corner by Joe, where his property line is, and I got it. And then right away when I shot it, I had a little concern, like, I just shot this nice buck right on the spot that I told Joe that I was concerned, that I knew that they were coming, and he knew it too. But that's kind of how we got to know each other. And over the last couple of years between Jake, Joe, and myself, we pretty much...
I've been hunting with each other ever since.
Yeah.
And calling each other like little girls.
Yeah, our wives...
Pretty much daily. Our wives make fun of us every day. Because we talk probably to each other more than our wives some days, and they make fun of us a lot about it.
So that's how Joe and I, came to know each other, and why he's sitting here carving on this deer across from me right now. Our goal, what we're going to talk about today, is about the rut, a little bit what's happening with the rut. We're going to talk about what all happened this weekend. So if you're listening to this, we're recording it on Monday the 30th. So you're probably going to listen to this on November the 1st or the 2nd, leading into the gun season. And we got that coming up. We got the Minnesota gun season. But this past weekend, so obviously leading into Halloween weekend is always a huge deal for any bow hunter. And our goal this year was to do a deer hunt derby. So we just wanted to get friends and family or whoever together to come out and hunt. And if you couldn't come out and hunt or get together, we were kind of doing an online thing. So our goal this weekend was a deer hunt derby. So we were set, myself, a buddy of mine, Greg Anderson, another friend, Greg Theis, Joe, Jake. I don't know if I'm missing that was actually out at base camp. Grandpa, yep, like my dad, Carter's grandpa, he was hunting. So we actually started. What was that, bud? Kyle wasn't hunting. Kyle, which Kyle? Britlinger? Mm-hmm. Kyle wasn't hunting. Carter's referring to other people that were maybe hunting here, and he mentioned a buddy that has twins. He's occupied. So Kyle, we wish you were here, but Kyle wasn't here. So it was a crazy weekend for most of you that know. Last week leading into Friday, central Minnesota and a good chunk of Minnesota got a pretty heavy snowstorm, nasty weather, winds. So it was a week and a weekend of weather. What do you need, bud? The big. It was a weekend of weather that typically doesn't happen like this. I mean, every once in 30 years you might have a weekend coming like we had. So I think everyone, to say the least, was pretty jacked up.
Everybody was jacked up.
And it started off Friday morning. The snow came Thursday night, and that's obviously what we thought was going to be the precursor. And then leading into Friday morning, our good friend Scott Rademacher was out in Wisconsin hunting during the snowstorm. And about 10 a.m., he shot a beautiful buck. He was estimating it to be around the 150-inch mark or so, but regardless, he had some extreme success. And if you listen, so here's where things, if you listen to the last podcast, I talked about how it's just good to be in the woods because weird stuff happens. Well, if you listen to last week's podcast with me and Scott, we talked about Kyle Kohlbaum harvesting 3 bucks in 3 years on the exact same date. And then the year after that, if you followed along, then Scott shot a buck on the exact same date. Scott shot his first buck out there. And then that was on October 28th, 2016, and then Friday morning was the 27th, and he shot his second buck almost exactly 1 year to the date. So there's a lot of coincidences going on over in Wisconsin. And then at home here, Joe's future brother-in-law, Roy Ash, had an encounter. That would have been on Friday night.
During the snowstorm.
So why don't you go ahead and fill him in on Roy's hunt.
On Roy's deer?
Yep.
Well, I was out in the woods, freezing my tail off, battling the winds, and I get actually it wasn't a text, it was a Snapchat from Roy. Some sarcastic comment about him flinging an arrow and not knowing exactly where he hit it because it happened so fast. So I had no clue what happened. As soon as I get out of the stand, I give him a call, and he had told me that he had a buck. He had no clue how big or small it was. He might have been shaking because this might have been his first bow kill ever. I call him, and he tells me that he had a buck chasing, I think just one doe, a doe or does, and it looked mature, had a nice body on it. He didn't get a good look at the antlers, and it was quartering away very hard, and he got a shot off, and that's all he knows. So I show up to his property, and we look at his arrow. He had already kind of found the blood trail and pulled out, didn't have good flashlights, and pick up on the blood trail, and it was wet, rainy, swampy. It was tough. It was really tough. So we start tracking this deer through the swamp, coming and going with good blood, bad blood, working our way through the water, and we get to a point probably 150 yards away from the shot site, and we hit a wall. We hit a fence line, and we could not find it. Left, right, forward, could not find it. Didn't know what it had done. So we decided to call Wes and his good buddy out to the property. They showed up 15 minutes later, and Wes had I called it a CSI light.
It's called an ice light for photography. My wife does photography, and we just purchased an ice light. So it's photography purposes, but it's a huge wand that lights up, and that's what I thought as I'm heading out the door, well, maybe that would be a good piece of equipment to bring.
That was a great piece of equipment, because if we didn't have that, we would not have recovered Roy's buck. So they get out there, we're looking all over the place, not finding anything. Pretty soon, Wes yells blood. It was you, correct?
We found
Was it you?
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
It wasn't Greg, was it?
I don't think so.
So Wes yells blood, and we go over there. This is probably, I don't know, 20 feet into the fence. Cross the fence line. It had jumped the fence. We find a little prick of blood, and I don't know, every 20 feet right away, we found a drop of blood. Finally, it starts picking up a little bit. Long story short, we make our way, I don't know, 3/4 of a mile. We went through somebody's backyard, got permission, kind of startled the lady. But
Was she startled? We never talked about that.
She was very startled.
Yeah.
Yeah, she goes, I don't know who that was. Nobody had headlights, and
It wasn't a perfect scenario.
it was not a perfect scenario.
It was getting, what was that, 9:30 probably?
It was about 9:30, and we ended up in somebody's backyard. We had just crossed the property line, and we knew that. And so we go, all right. Roy and I went and got permission, and Wes and Greg continued tracking blood. So finally, we get permission, come back, and they had actually had a huge break in the blood trail. We finally found blood. They had been searching almost the entire time that we were getting permission, because it was really thinning out. Long story short, it continued to run across, another field, into another field,
Across the road, went into another guy's property that Roy knew.
Yep. Talked to him for a while.
But that's the next day.
This is the next day.
Unfortunately, it was when you're talking about tracking the deer, we came across a couple beds that it got out of. So we had the decision to make to either keep going or back out. Our fear was if we backed out with the rain and the snow that all the blood was going to wash away. So we knew that it was wounded, definitely. I mean, we had in some spots the blood was grim and our hopes got up. In some spots, it's like this deer has got to be dead. So we kept pushing for a while, but we feel like we bumped it a couple different times, and then we finally hit about 10:30 Friday night and said, all right, that's enough, we're done. And then
picked up Saturday morning, 9:30 when Roy got done. Yeah, take in mind that Roy was going on, I don't know,
a couple hours of sleep.
A couple hours of sleep and 30-something hours.
And then having to go back to work.
And he had to go to work at 1 a.m. that night.
Yep.
And he come back after his shift at work, and we picked up on the blood, went across a hayfield, went across a county road, into another hayfield, into another man's property, got permission from him. Actually, Roy was getting permission from him while Wes and I come up on the deer, and we were tickled. Roy showed up, and he was grinning ear to ear, and
what's cool about it is for Roy, this was his first buck with a bow.
This was his first deer with a bow.
It was his first deer with a bow.
This is his first deer with a bow, and it was...
Yeah, so that's special for anyone.
It was bigger than he had actually thought. It was a nice 9-pointer. I think it was old.
It looked old.
It was a huge body. We figured the body was dressed out probably 240, 220, 240.
It was very, very large.
Very
large deer. Big deer.
Very large deer. But I'd be happy if I was Roy. And it was a great experience.
Yep. What's funny? That's going to stay out. I got to go to the propane tank. I'll do it in a little bit. So that was Roy's story. So that was on Friday night. So you had Saturday morning. I think we were all out. I don't know if anything happened Saturday morning. I don't think
you went and didn't see any deer at
I didn't see nothing. I shot at a fox and missed. And then on Saturday night, which would have been last night. Oh no, I take it back. So Friday. Yeah, Saturday not much happened, and then Saturday night. Wait, what is it? I'm lost on the day.
It happened Sunday.
What did? Right, today's Monday.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry. I've been on vacation, so my days are mixed up.
He's been on a rutcation.
I've been on rutcation. I don't know what's what. So we also had first-time bow hunter Greg Theis out here. He came up. That was on Saturday afternoon. and we got him out in a stand, and he was pretty excited. It was his first time out sitting with a bow. He's been practicing for the last year or so and has really taken a liking to it. And we were at a wedding a couple months ago, and he mentioned that he really wanted to get out bow hunting. I said, well, come on out. Let's get you on a deer. So it was fun to get him out. He had some action. He seen a couple does, and then he actually had a 6-pointer that came right, I think it was up to 20, 25 yards or so. He was able to get a shot off. He did miss it. But hearing him recount the story and just how much he loved just sitting and being out in the woods was pretty neat. So it's good to hear. Greg had some action, especially with him getting out for his first time with the bow and just getting a shot off is pretty cool. On Saturday night, my dad shot one in St. Cloud, a doe. So then he got that with his crossbow, and then we went to go take care of that. He claimed it was a decent-sized doe, which was exciting. And then I would have to claim, my assumption is that it was a fawn, and he wasn't real thrilled to hear our synopsis of the situation, but we teased him a little bit, and it was fun. But he got one with his crossbow, so that was some action. And then Sunday morning, I think Greg and I, who stayed here at base camp, we slept in.
Jake went out.
Jake went out. Yep.
He saw one butt.
Yep, walking away from him.
Yep.
So that brings us then to
Sunday night, the main event.
Sunday night. So, what's that? That? I think so.
So,
Might be able to get some chunks off of that. So it all began for Joe and I last night as we're sitting here cutting on it. What time did you get to your stand?
I got to my stand late because we were hanging sets for rifle opener. I didn't get to my stand until 4 o'clock.
So yeah, and I didn't get.
You were late too because you were helping your dad.
I was helping Dad cut up his doe in St. Cloud, so I got back and I was running late. So I got back. I jumped into a spot quick, really with no intentions. I mean, obviously my intention is to hunt, but where I was going, I didn't think that there would be an opportunity for a big mature buck. So I guess I wasn't prepared. You know, some hunts you go in, you're all jacked up, and some hunts you go in, you're just like, I'm just gonna go sit for a little bit. That was for me the latter part of that. Joe and I were probably about
half mile apart.
Half miles of crow flies from each other. And we're sitting there, we're texting between Jake and Joe and I on the phone and BSing and cracking jokes and whatnot. And the one joke that I cracked, which is cheesy, but it's kind of funny how it plays into it, on a text message, I said, knock knock, to the two fools. And they said, who's there? And I said, deer. And they said, deer who? And I said, dear God, please let Joe and I shoot a buck tonight. So, not knowing that might have been what was really happening, about 6:15,
6:14 less.
6:14, I had a buck that came from a little gully to about 20 yards. And I forgot to tell you this, Joe. Before it crossed my path of where, like, how I entered into the tree stand, he sat there for about a minute doing it. Sniffing, smelling. So I thought,
panic.
My path was going right into his nose, so I thought either one, he smelt me, or he smelt the doe that was ahead of me. There was a doe that came up before him. And I forgot to mention too, before this buck came, 20 minutes before that, I rattled. And I had a 1-pointer come, and then I had him come. So I believe the rattling brought him in, but that's my assumption of it. So at that point, he got to 20 yards. I determined, yep, I'm going to shoot this deer. And I pulled up. I got drawn back. I did the burp, but I got so excited I didn't really have my sights lined up.
He pre-bropped.
I pre-bropped. I did a pre-burp. So he stood there, and I had the peep sight and the pin, but I didn't have it lined up perfectly. So it took me about extra 2 seconds. I let go, and I hit it right where I was aiming. And he went 20 yards and folded up right on the spot. First deer I ever seen, for me, on archery-wise, to die right there. So at that point, I get out my phone, I text the group message to Jake and Joe. I just shot one, it's down, no track job needed. And then...
Do you want me to start now?
Then you can start. Now you can, yeah.
So, back up 30 seconds. I'm watching a doe and a fawn that had come out right in front of me. This is a fresh set. I set that morning. I had the perfect wind to set my new stand. I had all this intel from my previous stand. Knew exactly where to put this stand. Just needed the right wind to get it in. So I went out 10 a.m. that morning. Set this fresh set in a horrible tree. Did not like it. Had zero cover. It was
you already had a set?
I had that other set to the northeast.
Oh.
100 yards.
Okay.
So, thank you, Wes.
Yep.
So I had this brand new set. I put it in 10 a.m. that morning. Pulled out of there. Helped my dad set all his stand and my stand for rifle. Got out to the woods at 4 o'clock. Sat down. Not happy with the tree. It was a little teeny tiny ash tree, but it was the only spot exactly where I wanted it to be. So I'm in the tree. 6 o'clock or so shows up. Doe and a fawn come out. The doe jumps the fence, walks right where I wanted her to walk, stops, stares right at me. So I'm like, great, my hunt's done. She stares at me for probably 5 minutes. Well, it felt like an hour. Finally, she puts her head down, starts walking away, never picked up on me. If she would have blew, my hunt would have been spoiled. So the doe leaves and the fawn hangs out. For whatever reason, the fawn kept looking back, didn't know what was going on. Turns out that fawn was looking at this little tiny 7-pointer that was to my northwest, and was looking at that, finally walked away. I still hadn't seen the 7-pointer. Fawn walks away, 7-pointer shows up, okay, cool, looking at a buck. And then that 7-pointer starts to act funny. I'm like, what is he doing? Is he scared of a fawn or what? So finally that 7-pointer starts to kind of back up a little bit, kind of getting weary, and I look to my left because I heard a little bit of a leaves crackling, and it's one of my bucks that I had on camera. I called him the Big Six. I know he's a 2.5-year-old, but it was too cool of a story not to shoot. He jumped the fence, and as soon as he jumped the fence and realized that that 7-pointer was standing there, he started making a scrape. And this was the most aggressive scrape I've ever seen in the woods. He broke this little tree off and was, I don't know, he was probably scraping for 30 seconds before I decided I'm going to shoot him. And pull back, and it was really hard to nestle my sight because he was moving so much because he was thrashing.
So you had the same problem I did.
I had the same problem you had. He was thrashing, and I didn't have a chance. It all happened so fast, I didn't have a chance to range him. So I looked and I said, okay, 20. Put my 20 pin right on his lungs and pull the pin. And I watched my arrow drop and drop and drop. And I thought I was going to miss low, but I drilled him right in the heart, just below where I wanted. It actually turned out I ranged it later. It was 27 yards. But he ran, he took off. Got his head stuck in a fence for probably 20 seconds. Finally got his head out, ran another 15, 20 yards and piled up right there. So Wes and let me go back. While I was at full draw, I had my phone in my kangaroo pouch, hand warmer, and it is vibrating like crazy. I'm like, really guys, what is going on that's so important right now that you need to be doing this right now? I'm trying to shoot a deer. So I shoot this deer, he piles up, and I'm like, I'm going to text the group. So I checked my phone, and Wes said exactly what he told you guys. Just shot one, no blood trail, no track job needed. And I'm like, are you kidding me? So, long story short, I shot mine at 6:15, and Wes shot his at 6:14, a half a mile apart. And they're both beautiful deer.
So that was the excitement that we had. So we got back done last night. We got Joe's. We got mine. We took pictures. If you're watching this on Facebook, you'll see the pictures that we're talking about. But that and that pretty much capped off the weekend. So come a long ways from first moving out here to all of a sudden now we got 2 bucks down, and Joe and I are friends and we're cleaning together. So it's kind of cool how when it comes to hunting, there's tons of different situations that you can make, especially when it comes to trying to get along with other hunters. And that's one thing where it worked out for Joe and I. That looks like a good piece of meat. Yeah. Was just trying to be proactive instead of saying, "Oh, I'll run into them and then we'll figure it out while we're in the woods someday." No, we got to know each other, and because of that, we've shared intel, and I think we've both become better hunters.
Yep. Bottom line, I should have given him a little bit better of a first impression. I was very quick to make assumptions. Bottom line, keep an open mind.
I think overall, from the story between Joe and I and how we came to meet and become friends, is just a good example or a good reason to go out and talk to your neighbors, especially when it comes on the hunting end of it, to go and you hear of folks that hunt a certain way and they get frustrated because others hunt a different way. But I think if you just went and knocked on the door and introduced yourself and tried to find some common ground, I think overall it's just going to lead to better relationships and funner times hunting. And you never know, you might create a friendship out of it. So the other thing that I want to talk about was, for me, when I was pulled back on the buck yesterday, so the buck I shot it's a nice 3.5-year-old buck, a beautiful rack, everything you could hope for. I've been picky the last couple of years, and when I pulled back, a couple of things ran through my mind. One of them, which was being Winona, because if I didn't shoot a deer, I'd be leaving for Winona tomorrow. So it's interesting how being out in the woods and when you have different opportunities, how it's a butterfly effect, or how much change happens from pulling the trigger. Because I went from my schedule of being off for 2 weeks, thinking this is going to be a long season. I might be hunting in December. I started thinking about muzzleloader. I started thinking about gun season. And then all of a sudden, within 30 seconds, it completely all changed. I mean, for me, it's the full butterfly effect, because I should be traveling down to Winona. I should be not worried about work. But now that I pulled the trigger, everything changed. So I find it interesting on how significant hunting is. And even though it's just an animal, when you do get it, or you actually pull the trigger, many things change. I mean, things change for the animal, things change for me. It steers you in a whole different direction in life that you weren't even planning for. So it's pretty cool to just know that Mother Nature played a part. And right now, me and Joe sitting across from each other cutting on a deer. Otherwise, what would we be doing?
Probably be out in the woods freezing in this 25-mile-an-hour winds. No, now I get a chance to spend Halloween with my wife. She wanted me to go with to her grandpa and grandma's. I would love to have gone, but Halloween is my favorite hunt of the year. And now everything changed for me, because I'll be eating pizza at grandma and grandpa's.
I don't know if others out there that are listening feel that when they shoot something, and like that butterfly effect or the change I was talking about, like there's a little bit of sadness to it. A
little bit of remorse.
A little bit of remorse. I don't know if that's something that a lot of people deal with. I know Joe and I were talking that you kind of felt it.
I do.
I felt it on my end.
No matter how big of a buck you shoot, you always feel like you could have done better. That's how I feel anyhow.
So that's the recap of the weekend. That's our talk. We're going to continue wrapping up on the deer here. Speaking of deer and meat, with our deer meat, we generally cut out the back straps and make those in the steaks. The rest we process. Joe, do you guys do it differently?
We just bought a grinder last year. Well, last year was the first year we ever used it, and that's been our favorite thing so far. Is we usually just make a bunch of chili, and then I mainly do a lot of jerky and a lot of chili. So I'd love to hear some venison recipes if you guys want to comment. I'm always open to new suggestions. I'm not real big on anything I have right now for recipes, so I'd love to hear some recipes.
All right. Well, we got more meat to cut up on here, and
We're kind of sidetracked right now. It's hard to talk and cut at the same time.
we are a little sidetracked, but we wanted to jump on here, give a quick recap of what took place this weekend. Talk about Joe and I a little bit. Again, you'll probably hear Joe some more on some future podcasts. But for now, that's it. We're gonna keep cleaning up deer, putting meat in bags, and kind of get ready for the upcoming gun season. So, best of luck to everyone out there. We hope everyone's having a good time and being safe. Send us some pics if you got them, and peace out.